Now, I want to talk about MPs winding down pay. So when you stop being an MP, here's the old system. So you say, right, do you know what, I'm an MP, I'm going to stand down. 70 or so of them have done so far. They see the writing on the wall in the 2024 election. Maybe they're reached an age where they want to retire and they say, right, I'm retiring. And then at the end of that time, they get paid up to the last day, of course, of the election, and then, or the election period starting, and then they are not paid, and then they go off into whatever their next life is after being an MP. Now, if you stand for election, if you try to continue to be an MP and you lose, you were, under the old system, given a payment of two months payment, basically saying, look, your office is there, it has to, you've got to wind it up, you've got to tell your employees they don't have a job anymore, they might have thought they had a job but they don't, you've got to close the office, it takes a bit of time, there's a bit of admin, we're going to pay you for 2 months. I think that's probably fair enough. But now, the independent body which deals with these things, it's not the MPs themselves, but an independent body which deals with these things, has decided in its great wisdom to give all MPs, whether they want to stand for election or whether they're saying they have decided to stand down. I can think of one MP off the top of my head who said nearly a year ago that she was standing down. They're going to give all those MPs, whether they like it or not, 4 months' salary. 4 months' salary, nearly £20,000, despite the fact that they might have given a year or even 2 years' notice of the fact they're standing down. If they lose their seat, they get 4 months. If they don't even stand, they get 4 months' payment. I think that's ludicrous, but I know that not everybody does. I want to know what you think. 0344 499 1000. Nick De Bois is a former MP. He's a broadcaster as well. In fact, he'll be on this station tomorrow, I think between 1 and 4. And Ben Cope is a political writer and commentator. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Morning.
Nick, it is between 1 and 4 you're on tomorrow, isn't it?
It is indeed, thank you, but obviously not for the following 3 weeks. As
that's right. Yeah, yes. sorry about that, Nick. Yes. So, Nick, tell me your side of the argument, and then I'll tell you why you're wrong.
Well, I think it's slightly nuanced and influenced by what happened to me in 2015, Peter. And whilst I agree with some of what you said, I think the principle needs to be established that when an MP who stands for election loses their seat, most people think that should be the end of it. In fact, it isn't. As I found out, it took me 3 months to close down every single requirement of IPSA, the body that manages us, if you like. It took 3 months of work that I had to do, and my staff, to close down the office, which might sound a bit bizarre.
No, just outline that a little bit for us. So you were an MP between 2010 and 2015. You lost your seat in 2015. You obviously employed, how many people do you employ, 3 or 4?
Well, I think at the time it was about 4, maybe 5 people.
Sure. Okay? So they all had to have a bit of notice. You needed to wind up the office and so on. Yeah. And it took you 3 months. So you were paid because you had stood for election. So you were given a salary for 2 months.
No, I wasn't. I didn't get anything. So this is why the reforms have come about. You've got to remember, in 2015, Peter, we were in what was the post-expenses scandal culture. So the idea of coming down really hard on MPs was pretty popular. And as ever with these things, the pendulum swung, in my opinion, on this particular issue too far. So my pay stopped on the moment I lost the election. So I got a paycheck for May of about 6 days, and I was out of work. But I was going to be entitled to a redundancy payment. That was going to come in. However, the rules made it, it was kind of carrot and stick. Listen, old chap, they said, you've got to close your office, you've got to deal with your staff, you've got to put the office right, you've got to close the lease, negotiate the lease, settle all the utility bills, and you know, on it goes. There was even casework that we had to wind down. You can't just pick up a file and chuck it to your next MP. So we had these issues to deal with. But where in any other walk of life would they say to you, you've been made redundant, we want you to work for at least 3 months, and at the end of that, you'll get your redundancy check, but we're not going to pay you a cent whilst you occupy your time to do this. And that's what happened in 2015, which I think, honestly, if people think about it, they would think that was unreasonable. So the compromise was brought in at 2017, but actually after the 2000, I think it might have been after the 2017 election, I could be wrong, where essentially you were then effectively given a redundancy payment.
Yeah, that's right.
And so forth. But I'm not sure if it was at that point or afterwards you got paid 2 months to wind down the office.
That's if you stand for election, but not if you say you're standing down. Let me bring in Ben Cope, who's a political writer and commentator here. Ben, I actually have more sympathy with what Nick was saying than I let on, and I do think there are definite ways in which MPs should be sort of helped to wind up their offices. It's not really fair on the people who work for them. Of course, I suppose they know that when they sign up for the job that their MP could lose their seat. But I think there are a lot of people going through the cost of living crisis, Ben, who would say, well, hold on a second, 4 months salary for a job you know you're going to lose. It's different if you're standing for election, but even people who have said maybe a year ago in some cases that they're standing down, that they still get another 4 months salary. What do you think of this, Ben?
I do think it's excessive, and while I sympathise with you, Nick, that losing your seat is a traumatic experience to go through, and it sounds like you clearly did unpaid work, which no one should have to do. But I think the key question we should be asking ourselves here, as with all questions about how much publicly elected officials should be paid or expenses that they received, is paying them more in the public interest. And as you say, Peter, I think particularly during the cost of living crisis, many people will be thinking, why should we be paying MPs who have, they're no longer our MP. In some situations, we have literally voted them out. Why should we be continuing to pay them money? And I think what we should be doing here, instead of thinking about ways that we can just sort of pay MPs for longer after they lose their seats, or sort of draw the process out, is think about ways that we can speed that process up, ways that we can support former MPs to make that transition smoother. And I think one way to do that is to centralise the support a lot more. So rather than each MP having to close their office down individually, which most MPs will only have to do that once, so they won't have a huge amount of experience to do that. Can we centralise it? Can they get some support there so that the transition can be much easier?
Would centralised support have helped you, Nick, or would it have just complicated things?
Well, look, in principle, I think what Ben's talking about there is quite sensible. But the problem was, had I been in financial need, which, quite a lot of MPs are, I hold my hands up, I wasn't because of my background. What it comes with is until you settle all those, the last utility bill is settled and paid and claimed for through the IPSA expense system, we won't give you your redundancy. And that was where it went wrong. So you were literally against the clock without any money.
Let me just give you a sense, Nick, of what people are saying here. Jane has been in touch on Twitter saying, "Hi Peter, it is the timing of this. I suppose it will be a good topic on the doorstep during the election campaign whilst everyone is skint." Max in Nuneaton says, "Hello Peter, do the MPs not already fleece us enough? They're all a joke. I'm looking forward to a great show," says Max. Thank you. Terry in Slough says, "It seems a lot of our MPs love this country like a farmer loves his cow because they milk it." Mick in Wallington says, "How do the public get a job on IPSA, or is it a closed shop?" Says Mick. And Matthew, final one here, says, "Do politicians not know the rules when they apply?" Well, in fairness, the rules actually changed a little bit, as you said. And IPSA can kind of do what it wants, really, as well, Nick, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, IPSA, frankly, were part of the problem. It should have been easy for me to close down. Look, I've run businesses. It should be easy for me to close down an office, which isn't massive by any means, within a month. But IPSA made it a very torturous process. And that's why a select committee chaired by Charles Walker, which I was one of a number of former MPs that gave evidence, looked at the process, including would a centralisation that Ben's been talking about be a way forward. Look, I didn't expect to win friends over this, Peter, by taking this line. All I'm asking people to do is just think about, that principle. Yeah. If you are made redundant, would you go back to your office for the next 2, 3, and in some cases, it took some people 5 or 6 months because of the difficulties IPSA presented. Would you expect to do that and not be paid for it? And I just think on this case, whilst 4 months is, I think, too long, 3 months would have been fairer because that is pretty much the average it takes. And I do agree with both of you that if you give notice you are leaving, actually, there should be no guaranteed payment. But look carefully at the detail. My understanding is you have to prove to IPSA you are working to be able to claim this money. I'm happy to be corrected, but that's how I read it.
I think you're right. Ben, final thought from you on this.
I think I agree with both of you that I think that a lot of the rules and stipulations that IPSA are putting in here are excessive. But I think that for MPs to kind of to palm off responsibility on IPSA and blame them potentially isn't the right approach, because after
But what's the alternative? I mean, they could give the money to charity, I suppose. They could make a commitment to that. I do think Nick is right. If you do say, look, I'm standing down, you shouldn't get the money. I mean, there's one MP I can think of, Chloe Smith, the MP for Norwich North, said about a year ago she was standing down. She could, in theory, have a 2-year period, or almost a 2-year period, where people have known she's standing down, yet she will still get, through no fault of her own, a 4-month payoff as a result. So surely the rules should be changed again to say that if you know you're standing down, as over 70 MPs have said they are, that you don't take this payment, or there should be a mechanism for you not to take it or to refuse it.
I definitely agree, but I think MPs need to remember that they outsource responsibility to IPSA, and if they don't like the decisions that they're making, they can always take that back in-house and make the decisions that
I think it would be a very brave set of MPs who took control of IPSA again. But Ben, that's a fair point, I suppose. Nick De Bois and Ben Cope, thank you both very, very much indeed for that debate. Well done, Nick, especially for coming on to defend it. I mean, that is not going to be a very popular point. Although, actually, if Nick is still listening, Max in Nuneaton has said, OK, Peter, tell Nick De Bois he's made his point very well. I've changed my mind. Excellent. Not only do I like the fact that Nick has persuaded you, I like the fact that you have said that he's persuaded you. There's nothing wrong with changing your mind in any sense at all.